If the money was in escrow, who's controlling the money that's in escrow?
In this case, Mr. Hans renegotiated the payment plan with Tetra Tech so that he would pay them directly. And the Forest Service didn't object to that, which was unfortunate. As these projects go along, just like any other contract, you end up with renegotiating a contract endless times as the scope changes and so on and so forth. And so one of those contract renegotiations involved a change in how they would be paid, such that Mr. Hans got to approve all of the products before payment would be authorized. And it would come directly from Lovell McCombs rather than from the Forest Service escrow account. So the process got pretty well botched. And as a result, the product got pretty well botched. And we ended up with an analysis that didn't really say anything. It didn't answer anybody's questions about, hey, what are the impacts going to be to the local economies in South Fork and in Pagosa Springs? How many people are we actually talking about traveling on Highway 160, and what are the impacts to public safety? Where is the power going to come from for this project if the power line coming up to the Wolf Creek ski area currently is more or less at capacity? So on and so on and so forth. None of those questions got answered because the analysis was artificially narrow in scope. Colorado Wild filed a lawsuit. The court issued an injunction basically agreeing with us that it appeared as though this analysis really didn't meet the requirements of the law, what an EIS needs to be, which is kind of thorough and comprehensive, and addressing the concerns raised by the public through that process. And so rather than wait it out and wait for the court to eventually issue a final decision, the Forest Service and the developer came to us and said, hey, we can see the writing on the wall. We know the court doesn't seem to like this document very much. We've been pretty well beat up in the press. We're willing to make this all go away. We want to sign a settlement agreement with you and we'll start all over, and we'll do a new EIS, and we'll have the Forest Service do it themselves with their own staff this time rather than a private contractor. The developer will still pay for it, but we're going to start all over, and we're going to do a comprehensive analysis and finally get this project done. And we said, great, now that's what we've been asking for all along. I think that's I think there's a real misconception about where Colorado Wild's coming from on this project, and part of that is everybody's got a different perspective on this project, and I'm not here to change anybody's mind about whether the village is a good thing or a bad thing. What I do want you to understand is that, and what our organization believes in very strongly, is that if this project goes through a legitimate public process, which we would hope would be the case for any large-scale project, or any project for that matter, but particularly a big controversial project, goes through a legitimate process where we get good information about what the impacts pro and con of the project are going to be, and then we make a decision based on that good information, we don't really have any problem with what ends up going on up there. What we've had a problem with all along has been the developers' attempts, time and time again, behind closed doors with Wolf Creek ski area, through Congressman Tom DeLay's efforts, through paying off a private contractor, to try to keep all of those issues off the table, or at least push them forward in time to some point after approval's already granted, and say, we'll deal with that stuff later. That's, we just got to get some approvals first. We just got to get this project going. The process has always been botched, and that's why we feel like the project has never really gotten the scrutiny it deserves. It's my belief that if this project went through a legitimate process, and the various government agencies that have the expertise to say how much water does it take to actually serve a village of 10,000 people, how much sewage does that create, how can you properly treat it and deal with it and get it and put the effluent back in the stream without degrading fish habitat. If all those agencies got to weigh in and we crafted a project based on that analysis, we'd end up with a really different project than what Mr. McCombs has proposed so far. A really different project from what Bob Hans proposed, and frankly a very different project than what Clint Jones is proposing right now. Because we're still in the same process of you know, here's our grand idea, let's approve it first and we'll do the analysis second. And what we've been asking for all along, and frankly what the law requires, is that you do the analysis up front. And then you make a decision once you actually know something about what the impacts are going to be. And it very well may be that those impacts end up being, you know, largely positive from an economic perspective, or largely mitigatable from an environmental perspective, and we can find ways to make them go away. But I personally believe that the impacts would be significant, and significant enough to warrant reconsideration of the project, scaling it back down in size.
Do you have does Colorado Wild have an idea how big just probably your guess, just guess, how many units would be able to go up there, and from Colorado Wild's perspective?
You know, we don't, and we've been criticized for that, and I understand that from one perspective, but it's for the reason I just explained. Yeah, I don't have the expertise of the State Department of Public Health and Colorado Department of Public Transportation and the Environmental Protection Agency and everybody. You know, we're literally talking about dozens of specialists to look at every little aspect of this project and say, you know, what makes sense, what's feasible based on the property, on the water rights, on the traffic situation, etc. Those are the kind of analyses that we don't have the resources as a small organization to do, and frankly, you know, no one would believe us if we did them anyway. But that's why we have you know, these government agencies and their respective regulatory processes in place to provide that service to the public, and hopefully to use that information to inform public policy and decisions on these things. My guess is, you know, when this land exchange was originally approved, they anticipated a couple hundred units, like 200. Or actually, yeah, in some parts of the environmental assessment, 200 to 300, depends where you look. Yeah, so when you talk 200 homes versus 2,000 to 3,000, you know, units, or now Clint's proposal is looking at 1,800 units. Again, a lot of those being hotel rooms, where he's again counting 4 hotel rooms equaling 1 unit. So 2,500, 2,800 spaces for people to reside. Yeah, that's a really different scale than 200 or 300 residential units that was originally envisioned back in 1986. My hunch is it's probably somewhere in between those two numbers that's pretty sustainable up there.
His first phase includes somewhere
about
400
475, 450.
Is that, you think that's probably sustainable?
Yeah. Again, my gut feeling is it might be, but I don't think that's our responsibility to decide as just one organization. I think ultimately it would be ideal and it would and legal in many respects for that to be defined by what the resources are at hand. So, you know, my hunch is that that's pretty close, but again, we just don't have the information to make a really good decision about that.